Thank you all. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 23rd Budget Committee meetings of the Board of County Commissioners for Clackamas County. Before we elect a new chair, I want to remind the Budget Committee members that today we have a very heavy schedule. And all of you have times with the schedule on here, and we need to adhere to the schedule because we're going into the evening starting at 6 p.m. with public communication. Okay? So have your questions prepared in writing if you need be. Have your questions be very succinct. I will also say if anybody wants to discuss an item, please discuss the item. Please do not make a motion for further discussion. That is not allowed. It will not be accepted as a motion. If you want to discuss an item, discuss the item. If you want to make a motion, then you make the motion because in your heart you feel that's what should be done. Okay? So we'll go around the room with introductions, and we're going to start to my right. Kenny, we're going to go around the entire tables and with our introductions.
All right. Well, I'm Kenny Cernak and a citizen member of the Budget Committee.
I'm going to interrupt here. Our TS people behind the mirror told us yesterday, make sure we talk directly into the microphone so they can hear. And it's something that we're all not used to. So I'm going to remind everybody. I'll probably have to remind you folks again later on, but talk directly into the microphone. Thank you very much. Commissioner Schrader.
Martha Schrader, County Commissioner.
Ben West, County Commissioner.
James Rhodes, citizen member.
Sandra Montoya, Budget Manager.
Elizabeth Comfort, Finance Director.
Jan Lee, Committee Member for Community.
Mark Scholl, Commissioner.
Jamie Karn, Citizen Member.
Paul Savas, Clackamas County Commissioner.
Wilda Park, Citizen Member.
Tweety Smith, Chair, Clackamas County Commission. Gary, would you please introduce staff?
Yes. Tony, go ahead, please.
Tony Mernick, Clerk to the Board.
And I'm Gary Schmidt, County Administrator and County Budget Officer.
Good morning. I'm Stephen Madcourt, County Counsel.
Thank you very much. Why are you flashing the light at me?
Maybe it was Mr. Madcourt, is your light on? You're the last to speak.
Yes, I turned it on when I spoke. Then I turned it off.
Now you sound amplified, but you didn't then.
Okay.
So that might be why.
Yeah. So I get this flashing light at me when somebody's not speaking, and then I have to say something. So that's how I know. Okay, now we will move to nominations for the election of chair. I will open the floor for nominations for chair.
Chair Smith, I move that we nominate Kenneth Sternak to the chair of the Budget Committee.
Kenny Cernak has been nominated for chair. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner West has moved Kenny Cernak as chair, and Commissioner Savas has seconded that motion. Are there any other nominations for chair? Jan Lee.
Thank you. I nominate Wilda Parks.
Wilda Parks has been nominated for chair. Is there a second for that?
I'll second that.
Jan Lee has nominated Wilda Parks as chair, and James Rhodes has seconded that motion. Are there any other nominations for chair? Are there any other nominations with chair? So, Gary, since we have two nominees, do we vote on them both?
Vote on them one at a time, and 6 votes or more is required for affirmative.
Okay, any more discussion about the nominees? Do we want to hear from the nominees? Okay, no further discussion.
Sorry. You had asked whether or not we could hear from, I'm assuming both of you are interested in serving. That would be my question for both Wilda and Mr. Cernak.
Kenny Cernak, are you willing and able to serve as chair today?
Yes, I'm willing if that's what the committee would like.
Okay. Wilda Parks?
Yes.
Okay. Any further statements? I will now open up the voting Tony, please call the poll for Kenny Cernak.
Ms. Lee?
Jan
Jan Lee?
Yes, Wilda Parks.
No, we're voting yes or no on Kenny.
I didn't hear your question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, so today, at this moment, we are voting yes or no for Kenny Cernak. After this is finished, we will vote yes or no for Wilda Parks.
Thank you. No.
Okay.
Commissioner Scholl?
Yes.
Mr. Karn?
No.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Ms. Parks?
No.
Mr. Cernak?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
I'll vote no.
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Mr. Rhodes?
No.
Chair Smith?
No.
Chair, the result of that is 4/6. The motion should fail.
The motion has failed for Kenny Cernak. For chair, we will now vote on chair for Wilda Parks. Tony, please call the poll.
Mr. Rhodes?
Yes.
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
Mr. Cernak?
Aye.
Ms. Parks?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Mr. Karn?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
Ms. Lee?
Aye.
Chair Smith?
Aye. Nomination for Wilda Parks is 10-0. Thank you very much. I will now turn the gavel over to Chair Wilda Parks, and we will continue with the nominations for secretary.
We'd open it for nominations for the position of secretary. It's probably the easiest job on the budget committee, since you don't really have to keep minutes. They're kept for us, so appreciate that. Are there any nominees for secretary of the budget committee?
Chair, I nominate Kenny Cernak as secretary of the budget committee.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Second by James Rhodes.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other nominees for secretary? Hearing none, Tony, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Karn?
Aye.
Mr. Cernak?
Aye.
Ms. Lee?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
Mr. Rhodes?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
Chair Smith?
Aye.
Chair Parks?
Aye.
Chair, the result is 10-0.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Stephen Madcore or Gary, what is the duties of secretary?
Secretary typically keeps minutes.
Okay.
By the way, you'll need to vote on the last round of minutes as well.
Okay.
Vote on what?
Last year's minutes?
Yes,
Oh, yeah, in the beginning.
And is that before the budget message?
it will be.
Yeah, and then also, we could choose or to do or not have a vice chair. It's not required under Oregon budget law, but we have done so in the past, and that often works well. So if we need to adopt the minutes of the last meeting before we come back to that, then we can do that. Commissioner Savas and then Mr. Schmidt.
Yeah, just for Mr. Cernak's sake, our mode of taking minutes is the recording itself. So, Mr. Cernak, we don't need to get you a box of pencils.
I got a pen, it's just the paper I would need.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt.
I just want to confirm that our staff does the minutes, Kenny. You don't have to do that. Thank you.
So minutes and then the vice chair position. Should we do that?
If you want to pick a vice chair, that's fine, and then approve the minutes from the April meeting,
If
please.
there, yeah, if there's any nominees or whatever, okay.
Ben West has his card up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner West.
Chair Parks, thank you. Is the role of the vice chair, if Ms. Parks is unable to be here for whatever reason, would step in that capacity as chair? Is that the role?
Yeah, basically, and when there's been a vice chair, and there hasn't always been one, but at times when there's been one, they and the chair agree that one or the other will handle certain parts of the budget process, like the vice chair might be the one to handle the public testimony evening, for instance, or as we start actual deliberations or something. But basically, it's in case something happens and the chair is not available or gets hung up for a few minutes and can't get in the room, the vice chair can call the meeting to order.
Okay.
So, Sandra?
Chair, I just wanted to clarify that the minutes that you'll be reviewing and approving are from the April 26th Budget Committee meeting. The meeting for last year's Budget Committee meeting was approved on your meeting of January 25th of 2023. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. So the only one we have to worry about then is that April 26, 23
Correct.
meeting. Okay. The other one's mentioned, so I just wanted to double check and make sure I'm hearing that correctly. Thank you. So, okay, let's take care of the minutes and then we'll move on and see if we want to elect a vice chair.
I move we approve the minutes from the April 26, 2023 Budget Committee meeting.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the minutes of the April 26, 2023 Budget Committee meetings as distributed. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Tony, can we call for the vote, please?
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Mr. Cernak.
Aye.
Commissioner Schull.
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
I'll abstain. I was absent that day.
Ms. Lee.
Aye.
Mr. Rhodes.
Aye.
Mr. Karn.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye.
Chair Parks.
Aye.
Chair, the result is 9-0-1.
Thank you. Motion passes. As to the position of vice chair, are there any nominations?
I'd like to nominate James Rhodes as vice chair.
I'll second that.
I'm sorry, nominate who?
I would like to nominate James Rhodes as vice chair.
Thank you.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to nominate James Rhodes as vice chair. Are there any other nominations?
I move to nominate Chair Tootie Smith as vice chair.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to nominate Tootie Smith as vice chair. I'm going to make an assumption here that we would do these positions the same as what we did for the chair. We will start with the first one nominated and then move to the second one nominated.
Correct.
Okay. And let me, because I know my friend Mr. Karn down there is about to ask, would you both serve as vice chair? So, Ms. Smith, would you serve as vice chair?
James, would you like to serve as vice chair? Because I can step down.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, good. I'll step
And I'll
down.
withdraw my nomination.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So we have one nomination on the floor for
Thank you, Commissioner
James
Schrader.
Rhodes. Thank you, Ms. Smith. We call the roll, please, Tony.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Mr. Rhodes.
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Ms. Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Schull.
Aye.
Mr. Cernak.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Mr. Karn.
Aye.
Ms. Parks.
Aye.
Apologies on the reversal of the order there. Chair Smith.
Aye.
Chair, the results is 10-0.
Mr. Schmidt, may I ask a question about
Yes.
process?
Yes.
In the past, I recall that we have appointed someone or elected someone to the audit committee, but I don't see that on the agenda.
We have done that in prior years. Elizabeth or Sandra, are we going to do it now, or has that been completed?
It has been completed. It's a 2-year term, and Kenny Sarnak is that liaison from the Budget Committee to the Audit Committee.
Yeah, for some reason, it's difficult to hear people today, and
Testing.
You probably all know
There we
I wear
go.
hearing aids. They're turned up. I don't want to make them screech at you, but so I don't know if it is in fact hearing or if it's the microphones or whatever. But please just remember to speak directly into the microphone. That really helps. So thank you. So could you repeat what you had? I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
Absolutely. Elizabeth Comfort, Finance Director. Yes, we have already approved Kenny Sarnak as our liaison from the Budget Committee to the Audit Committee, and it's a 2-year term. So we're good for this year.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I just happened to notice it and thought I better ask. Okay. At this time, we are ready to proceed with the presentations by County Administrator Gary Schmidt, Finance Director Elizabeth Comfort, and Budget Manager Sandra Montoya. Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, members of the Budget Committee. I'm pleased to present to you the proposed Clackamas County budget for fiscal year 2023-2024. The budget for general county operations is $1,266,824,393, including the 8 county service districts of which the Board of County Commissioners are the governing body. The total Clackamas County proposed budget for fiscal year 2023-2024 is $1,795,511,240. Phew, the highest ever in Clackamas County's history. The proposed budget is balanced as required by Oregon state law. Let's cut to the chase. The real challenge of this year's budget was finding room in the county general fund to fund the county's portion of the replacement county courthouse. The state of Oregon is funding 50% of the county courthouse. Thank you, state. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That's why the county courthouse is being constructed right now in our history. The state is paying 50% of the construction costs. The county is paying the other 50%. The approximate total cost of the county courthouse is $313 million, of which the state of Oregon is going to pay half of that cost. Under direction of the Board of County Commissioners last year, the county's portion of the courthouse funding will be paid for from the county general fund. The Board of Commissioners is not asking the voters of Clackamas County to raise their property taxes or any other tax to fund the courthouse. Therefore, under the direction of the board, this proposed budget has identified $15 million of general fund reductions so that moving forward for the next 30 years, approximately $15 million of general fund will be taken off the top for the next 30 years to fund the county's portion of the replacement county courthouse. If you'll please turn on the budget message, which is on the slide deck, Tony Well, to page 7, I'll show you, and of course I hope you've read this, of where those proposed reductions will come from. Now, guidance that I gave to department directors and elected officials, and I feel we worked collaboratively together on this process. Guidance going forward was let's look strategically on where we could make reductions. It is not an across-the-board reduction. If so, it would have been 10% to every department and office, and that really is not feasible, so I'm not recommending that. Instead, some departments are taking a much higher percentage reduction, some are taking lower, but there were strategic, thoughtful considerations of where to make these proposed reductions. I asked departments, please apply standard business practices, distribute your administrative cost throughout your organization, spread your allocated cost formulas across your all funding streams. You've heard about this already. You'll hear more about it today. I've asked departments to please budget to actuals, not budget to budget. In other words, look at the actual money you've been spending the last 2 or 3 fiscal years. Base your budget on the actual spending you're making. Don't over budget or overestimate. Use vacancy savings. Almost every county department has vacancy savings. We are never 100% staffed year-round, ever. So use natural vacancy savings to consider budget savings. Reduce and eliminate duplicative and redundant services. And finally, maintain mandated services, which I define as a state or federal requirement that says only county government can provide these services. If that's the case, those are not on your proposed reduction list because we must provide those services. So on page 7 of the budget message, which is also on your screen, this is the proposal, how I got, and departments and offices got to the $15 million reduction. So you can see here, everyone is contributing to this effort. Everyone, every department that receives general fund and every office that receives general fund, including offices led by elected officials. So not so fast, Tony, scroll back up, sorry. So the first section here, the first column is a list of every a list of every department. Second column is the starting general fund support. This is the general fund support that office receives. The third and final column is the proposed reduction amount that is in the proposed budget. So you can see in that final column, every office that receives general fund is taking a reduction. The total from a departments led by appointed directors is $6.9 million of proposed reductions. Now please scroll down, Tony. Under elected officials, every elected official that receives general fund is also asked to make a reduction. You can see the amounts here. The total reductions proposed from offices led by elected officials is $2.5 million. As you're totaling here, the total number of reductions to direct departments and offices proposed is $9.4 million. That didn't get us totally to the cost of $15 million, so therefore, I next looked at allocated costs, cost allocations. Again, cost allocations are what every single department pays for internal or central service offices and functions here at the county. Things like human resources, information technology, which we call technology services, finance, legal counsel. Those are services every county department and office uses, and we call it a cost allocation model. Departments pay for those services that they use. Our cost allocation model, are you ready, is 30 years old, and minor modifications were made about 5 years ago. But the model is broken, and we have to change it to receive federal grants. It is a requirement to receive federal grants that we have a federally approved cost allocation model. So working with finance, we hired a consultant to look at our model. The consultant made recommendations. The report is in your packet or online for you to review. I accepted some of the recommendations, but not all. And it ultimately changes the cost allocation model. So this had to happen anyway. It had to happen, and I wanted to do it 3 fiscal years ago, but the pandemic hit and many other reasons that we were delayed. But this was going to happen regardless. It so happens to coincide we need to make reductions due to the courthouse. But this is not because of the courthouse funding that this cost allocation model changed. It had to change anyway. Oh, and by the way, the last 3 fiscal years, I froze cost allocations for all the internal service departments. Froze them. And I said this yesterday. No one complained, including respectfully members of the Budget Committee, when I did this, although it caused great harm to the internal service departments. So I had to true up the cost of those offices that were behind 3 fiscal years already. To ease the pain, because it is higher, yes, it is higher. The cost allocation model for every department and office is higher. I've offered a one-time general fund subsidy in this upcoming fiscal year to ease the pain. So that really gives departments an entire year from now to figure out what other modifications they may need to make. So with that, and you see it on this chart on page 7, cost allocation savings actually saves the general fund because the general fund for 20 plus years was subsidizing other departments to pay their cost allocations. So by making these proposed changes to the cost allocation model, it saves $5.6 million of general fund a year. And that's significant. So that's why I strongly encourage you to accept this proposal of the cost allocation changes. So with that, I'm back to page 7 here. Total reductions made to offices and elected officials' offices, $9.4 million. Cost allocation savings, if you accept the proposed cost allocation change, $5.6 million. A total of $15,900,000. That meets the direction the Board of County Commissioners gave me in proposing and preparing this budget. All right, the total general fund budget, and the general fund is primarily property taxes. This is discretionary money that the Budget Committee and the Board of County Commissioners determines how to spend. The total general fund for the upcoming fiscal year is $155.9 million. That's it. Out of your $1.7 billion budget, your general fund is $155.9 million. The Board of County Commissioners, the Budget Committee, and I as your budget officer are absolutely committed to public safety. Absolutely committed. Despite words to the contrary you're hearing in the public. Absolutely committed, and let me tell you how. The county courthouse is part of the public safety model of Clackamas County. It is part of the law and order public safety. So going forward, the county will be spending $15 million a year of general fund to pay for the county courthouse, the replacement courthouse. In addition, the sheriff's office in this proposed budget receives $74.6 million of general fund, the most general fund of any other department. The district attorney's office is going to receive $14.7 million of general fund. The juvenile department will receive $8.8 million of general fund. The disaster management office, which is also part of public safety, will receive $3 million of general fund. If you're adding up here, this is a total in the proposed budget of $116.1 million of general fund going entirely to public safety offices and departments of Clackamas County. Divide that by $155.9 million, and that equals 74%. 74% of the county's general fund is going to public safety. 2/3 of the general fund is going to public safety. I don't know how else, Budget Committee, I don't know how much more you can give unless you give 100%, in which case you will eliminate every other program and service Clackamas County provides. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention. All right, Tony, will you please go now to page 6 of my budget message? Unfortunately, we did have to reduce the full-time employee count of Clackamas County to meet this $15 million reduction. If you can scroll down, please, Tony. On the chart right there, distribution of FTEs. I want to draw your attention to this. I know it's in the packet, but please, just for a moment. So you can see the columns here, appointed departments, because these are the only departments that have reductions in staff. These are the only departments. The next 3 columns, budget cost allocation related to the budget reductions and the cost allocation changes. There are 5.6 employees, filled positions where people will be losing their jobs. And I'm sad and I'm sorry about that, because 5.6 very, very talented people, good people, through no fault of their own, will be losing their positions. But that's it. 5.6 positions due to this $15 million of budget reductions I'm proposing. 8.5 positions are vacant for a total of 14.15 positions that are being proposed for elimination due to the budget reductions or the increase in cost allocation model. The next section, additional reductions. These are primarily pandemic-related positions that were limited term that are ending. They started in 2020, and they were limited term positions for 3 years. This is now 2023. The positions are naturally ending. They are almost primarily in health, housing, and human services. But you can see from that section, 61.5 positions are vacant and are being eliminated, not related to budget reductions, but because the funding has ended through mostly CARES Act federal dollars, or in some cases, department reorganizations where those positions were no longer needed. 18 are filled, for a total of 79.5. So the last column is the total, including the proposed budget reductions and the ending of other funding streams. The total FTE reductions in this proposed budget is 93.6 positions, of which 23.6 are filled with people and 70 are vacant. So again, I'm sad, I'm sorry that these very good people, through no fault of their own, will be, if you approve this budget, will no longer work here, and that's very, very low for the amount of reductions that had to be made. All right, you can stop showing the slide deck now, Tony. This proposed budget, in my view, is good public policy. It is legal, it is appropriate, and in my view, it is the right thing to do. My authorities to present to you this budget are Oregon Revised Statute 294.331 and County Code Section 209.060, which names me the budget officer for all departments, all elected officials who lead departments, and all special districts. There are some challenges from that as well, and I do want to call it out. I'm only following the law. members of the Budget Committee. All right, I want to thank all of the department directors and elected officials and budget staff throughout Clackamas County that have been working for 6 months on this proposed budget. It has been very, very difficult. I know that. I accept that. Not everyone has agreed with my recommendations, but I feel we've been civil and professional about that as we've gone through this process. So I greatly thank, and many of them are in the room, the department directors and elected officials of Clackamas County, especially the budget team in the finance department, Elizabeth Comfort, the finance director, Sandra Montoya, the budget manager, Sandra's team, Blaze Riggins, Priscilla Montoya, Jian Zhang, and Roxanne Fisher have done phenomenal work helping prepare this proposed budget. My final comments before I'll take your questions. The protocol is moving forward. Members of the Budget Committee, you have received a proposed budget. It is now up to you to accept, reject, or modify this proposed budget. A reminder of your authorities. You each have 1 vote. You each have equal authority. A quorum of this committee is 6 members. 6 of you must be present at all times to conduct business. Approval of this proposed budget and/or any changes you make to this proposed budget requires a majority vote, which is 6 members out of the 10. That holds true even if 10 of you are not present. So if only 6 of you happen to be here, all 6 of you would have to approve any changes or final adoption. Budget Committee members are prohibited from discussing or deliberating on the budget outside of the Budget Committee meetings. If you do wish to make changes to this proposal, and I will not take it personally, you have every right to do so, you will have to identify other places that you wish to reduce to meet the $15 million reduction goal. Respectfully, you will stay here until you do that, whether it's today, tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, this weekend, on Memorial Day, as long as it takes or as short as it takes. But you do have to come up with a $15 million reduction if you disagree with what I'm proposing. Thank you for hearing my budget message. I'm happy at this point to answer any questions the committee may have.
Are there any questions of Administrator Schmidt at this time?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Yeah, and if I can interrupt you just a second to say, and for everybody, just do like Mr. Savas and Mr. Schultes did and put your card up so that we can then know that you have something to ask or discuss or clarify or whatever. So, Mr. Savas and then Schultes, thank you.
Yeah. Gary, thank you for your clear, concise presentation. I had a couple questions, but your presentation answered those, so thank you. Those of you who have known me for a number of years know that at this point in time in the budget, I make a comment and an observation, and I'm going to do that again this year, and I'll be brief. When I came on board in 2011, I based and listened, went along, watched the budget forecasting, observed, talked to department directors, elected directors, so forth, and observed for those 5 years. And I saw a trend in which was not looking very good in 2016, which I realized, oh my gosh, if everything was true in the past and everything's true going forward, we're going negative. And I identified that in 2016. Unfortunately, that was not recognized at the time, and it was only about a year or so later that staff did acknowledge that indeed we were about $13 million underwater. So I really believe in forecasting as best as possible. It's not an exact science, but it is something. And since then, I have been fighting for a not just a sustainable budget, but a structurally sound budget, meaning that something that you are on a glide path towards meeting your obligations and facing your liabilities in such a way that can sustain itself over the next coming forward 5 years. We're almost there. You know, Gary, you shared with me, I think you shared with others that next year we need not anywhere near the drastic cuts this year, but we need to make additional cuts, and I respect that. I understand that. I do want to say that this year, and even yesterday, I probably should have done this, but it was a long day yesterday, but I think if you can, all colleagues around the table, public and elected, if there's anything that might be educational, it's tab 27. Tab 27 is the cost allocation. I think that not only is it informative, but it's educational. And really, my observation is that coming from the private sector into the public sector, that cost allocations and how you expense your operations, whatever it is, whether it's in my business, I did service, I did manufacturing, I also sold parts, sold product. So you have to have a different formula for everything, but you have to expense everything. I'll just be brief and just say, well done on the budget, it's not exactly where I want to be, but considering what we're facing, I don't see anything jumping out at me that is a red flag, but I do think that the cost allocation model is way overdue, and I hope that everyone internally looks at their internal cost allocations and makes sure they're expensing everything correctly. Thank you.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes, thank you, Chair Parks. Administrator Schmidt, question, just to clarify, the general fund you propose for FY 23-24 is $155.9 million?
Correct.
Could you explain the quote, and shared revenue of $4.5 million on page 3? So my question, Administrator Schmidt, is the general fund $155 million, or is it $155 plus the $4.7 million shared revenue? Bottom of page 3.
Thank you. I will let our budget manager respond for me, please.
Sandra Montoya, Budget Manager. Thank you for the question. The general fund is actually larger. It's in the 23-24 budget, the total of all of the general fund departments is $484 million. Within those funds, departments generate some of their own revenue, whether that's through fees, through fines, charges, whatever it may be, grants. And so those monies are kept by those departments to use in their operations. When we talk about property tax is the discretionary funds. That's what the county can use for whatever purpose the board decides. That's why we refer to the $155 million, because that is the property tax piece. Like property tax that is discretionary, shared revenue, like cigarette tax, liquor tax, those things come to the county, and the county may dispose of those as it chooses as well. So that's why we segregate those two pots of money.
Understood. Thank you very much, Senator Montoya. The next question is, on page 7, your breakdown of the general fund support reduction amounts totaling $9.4 million. Administrator Schmidt, that's based on a formula derived from the number of FTEs in each of those sections. Is that correct?
No.
No?
The cost allocation model is based on FTEs,
okay.
But no, not these reductions.
And could you tell us the formula you used for that column on the total reductions in general fund?
Yes, thank you. As I mentioned at the start of my budget message, the direction I gave to offices and that I used for my review was a strategic, thoughtful reduction, apply standard business practices, budget actuals to actuals, use vacancy savings, reduce and eliminate duplicative and redundant services, maintain mandated services. So with all that guidance, departments made proposals, I reviewed them, and if they were part of the list I just read, and I felt, and of course, matches the board's priorities, your performance Clackamas goals. I did not accept any proposal that was in conflict with one of your strategic goals. Then that's what I put on the list for your consideration.
So could we assume that those numbers on that chart from the departments was an agreement from those departments?
Almost all the departments, yes.
Okay. And which ones had a conflict?
The sheriff's office disagreed.
Okay. Okay. And we're going to have ample time this afternoon to discuss those points of conflict?
Yes.
Okay. One final comment, just to make sure people who are watching understand that the allocated costs on this chart on page 7 are based on the number of FTEs. So that's just a straight FTE arithmetic, correct?
For the most part, yes, but please correct me, Sandra or Elizabeth, if I'm mistaken.
So Commissioner Scholl, we actually have a section in our presentation coming up on
Okay.
cost allocations.
Fine.
And so we will answer it in depth,
Okay.
but the short answer is each allocation has its own methodology. The majority
Okay.
of it is FTE.
Okay, well, okay, good. Thank you.
Commissioner Schmidt.
Thank you. Regarding cost allocation model for the folks listening, Gary, you mentioned briefly some of the items in cost allocation, but what is very real at Clackamas County and any business is the cost of doing business. For instance, this building that we're sitting in has a mortgage payment. This building we're sitting in has an electric bill and a water bill. And how are those paid? The cost allocation model distributes evenly, proportionately evenly, to each department. You will help pay the electric bill that you use. You will help pay for the water bill that makes your coffee and enables you to flush the toilets. That is no different than every single household in this county, and that cannot be overlooked. And when we ask the sheriff to help pay her electric bill and help use the water in her department, for instance, at the Brooks Building and at the jail, it is to allow them to use the water and flush their toilets and pay for their electric bill also. That is how basic it gets. Again, I want to reiterate, this is a federal government mandate. If we want to keep and continue using the federal monies that come into this county, which is hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, we must be in alignment with cost allocation model. We get grants that come in to some departments. Some departments are heavily, heavily funded by federal grants. We need to have a cost of implementing that federal grant. That federal grant person takes up office space, uses electricity, and flushes the toilet. That is how basic this is, and this is good business. Thank you, Gary Schmidt.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, and then Commissioner West.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Parks. I congratulate you on putting together the cost allocation after reading the consultant's report. I think it was well done. I have a question from a different area. There's $12.1 million in unallocated ARPA money. If we were to find some portions of the budget where we wanted to perhaps make a change, how could those dollars be used within the budget process?
Thank you, Jan. Actually, the Board of Commissioners just made some further allocations of ARPA last week, so that's down to about $7 million left to spend, so just a little bit of change. We have scoured the federal rules already very, very carefully on what we're allowed to spend those dollars on and what we're not. And also, it's one-time money, so even if we were to use it for some budget purposes, it would just be for 1 year. So I do feel that there's not really much left that we can use ARPA for ongoing operational expenses. We did all we can up to this point, but I don't think that's respectfully a solution for the budget issue today, this week.
And would it be expenses that are not ongoing if there is something in the budget that is a one-time purchase that could potentially?
That is possible. I do feel we've done that already up to this point with the almost $70 million we've already spent of ARPA. But certainly we could consider it, but I think we've done as best we can already with that. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner West, and then Commissioner Schroeder.
Thank you, Chair Parks. I'll have a comment and then I have a question. I really want to commend Director Elizabeth Comfort with the finance director, and Ms. Montoya, your work as a budget manager, and Gary Schmidt, your leadership as a in this role. It's been tough, but it's taken leadership to get to this point, and so I really appreciate what you guys have done and what I've witnessed behind the scenes over the last 5 months since being sworn in. I'm heartened, and I have hope that we'll get through this difficult process because we are aligning ourselves with the best professional standards and business practices with accounting and budgeting. And the amount of transparency an oversight in this process gives me some assurances that we're going in the right direction. And despite some of the unfair criticism, that we are still plotting a course that allows us to be the best stewards of public dollars as we possibly can. The amount of toiling and work and checking those figures, more than just once, and making sure that we're sustainable, structurally sound, and holding to those values has been very apparent to me as we go into this process. I have learned so much from the three of you. This has been not the easiest task early on in my role as a county commissioner, but it has been a fruitful one, and one that I can stand behind with all integrity. And thank you guys for your leadership in guiding this large organization in the right direction with a fiscally responsible budget that meets the essential needs and priorities of this county and helps us keep our promises to our citizens. So I appreciate that. My question is because I might have some questions as the new guy that maybe others know the answer to, but I'm just going to ask them. If we see a specific department and we have concerns about their cuts or their ability to have the essential resources they need to do their work, in this process, what is the best way, Gary, for us to kind of work that out? So if I can see one, I'm just gonna be honest, I see one specifically where I believe a certain department has for a long time not done with enough and has done a lot with a little. And it's not time to bring it up now because we're not talking about that specific department now, but what is the best way for us to discuss those issues and still kind of keep us moving in the right direction? I guess I'm asking for some guidance process-wise.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. So after you hear all the presentations today, later today and all day tomorrow, all day Thursday, as long as it takes, you have deliberation as a committee. So you can go down, so you have the authority to budget down to the line item, members of the Budget Committee. We normally don't do that, but you do have that authority. But you simply will just say, in this department, I disagree with this reduction, I actually want to give them more. And then I will ask you, great, please give me guidance where you'd like me to take instead. So it's just you'll have a discussion with all 10 of you and talk it through about what the options are.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schrader.
Yeah, let me first start by saying I want to thank your finance team, yourself, Gary, and Nancy Bush, because this has been, with everything that we've experienced between COVID, wildfires, still waiting for the asteroid to hit. This has been a very, very thorough job, and we appreciate your hard work. My question has to do with these buildings and debt service, because when is the debt service on this building and our other building, Public Services and Development Services, going to be retired, and will that be helpful in the near future? I don't know. I should know. The other piece of this is, with the Brooks building, that wasn't that building given to the sheriff's office at no cost to them? Do we know?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So the debt service, you're actually going to hear it in their presentation, but just really quick, I think it's 2027. Is that right? That both buildings, PSB and DSB? Go ahead, Sandra, please.
DSB is 2027, PSB and sheriff is 2033.
Okay, so PSB and sheriff is 2033. Okay, great. So that'll give us, maybe not a lot, but we will be retiring other dollars that eventually can help work with budgets in the future.
It'll eliminate, so the general fund pays most of the debt service, so we'll give more capacity in the general fund when those debt obligations are completed. Now, the courthouse, as a refresher, we're not taking debt on the courthouse. These are cash payments we're making every year for 15 years. So there's no courthouse debt, other than we're committing for 30 years to pay the price. But it does, long-winded answer, the debt service will be relieved as these other buildings are paid off.
And also with the courthouse, the folks who are building and are doing maintenance for 30 years, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
So that will be their responsibility to, okay.
That's part of our $15 million payment, is not only for the construction, but the ongoing maintenance for 30 years.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
I see no other questions at this time. Just for process, I do have a question. So you are at the point of presenting, I believe it's 6 of the departments. And my question is, would you like us to respond after each department and see if there are any questions, or how do you want to roll through those?
Thank you. Actually, Elizabeth and Priscilla is going to say that, but let me share my expectations is that. So again, this process is different, committee members and those watching. Each department is not coming up one at a time with the department director or elected official. We are presenting the entire organization's budget today. One day. Elizabeth and Sandra are leading that. They're going to do it in sections, though. We're going to request respectfully that you limit your questions today to clarifying questions, not to go into depth on any single department, but rather tomorrow and Thursday and Friday, that's when you'd have that in-depth conversation. I've asked all department directors and elected officials to be in the room, though, today, so they can come to the table and answer any specific questions you may have, respectfully asking, please don't delve too deep into a single office or department today, because we want to get through all offices today. But we'll do them by sections, yes.
And just for clarification, too, all departments of the county, including those under the auspices of elected officials as well as department heads, will be presented by our Budget and Finance.
That is correct. And elected officials will have an audience with you all at the end of today and tomorrow morning if needed. So they will individually come up and add anything that has not been shared or give their contrarian view if they wish to do that.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate just the affirmation on that. Thank you. Go ahead.
So with that, Elizabeth Comfort, the finance director, Sandra Montoya, the budget manager, is going to begin presenting the Clackamas County budget. So please go ahead, Elizabeth and Sandra.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Chair Parks and commissioners and budget committee members. I'm pleased to be here today to share with you the budget proposed, as Gary presented, for fiscal year 23-24. As he shared in his budget message, it is a balanced budget. We have one county here. We are one Clackamas County. We have one Clackamas County budget. And within the county budget, there are a number of departments. We have fantastic department directors with staff. They've all worked on their individual department budgets to put together a balanced department budget. And then within also the the county budget, there are a number of funds, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But it is one county budget, and it is a balanced budget. Sandra and I will review today at a high level key takeaways from this county budget that we'd like you to chew on, to think about, and then also to ask us follow-up questions. In the proposed budget document that you have the large notebooks, you have found their major accomplishments by department, their performance statistics, their program summaries, financial summaries, notes from the directors on significant policy and or financial issues. Lastly, in each department section, they provided summaries, financials, and notes on each line of business. So there's a lot of detail. We will not be covering those pages. We've left that to you to review. We'll stick at a high level and really what the significant changes are from each of the budgets. Our revenues drive the budget. So I remember one time a mentor said, taking out debt is easy, but you have to pay it back. So our revenues drive these budgets that we have. If we don't have the revenue, or if the revenue comes in less, we have to monitor and reduce our expenditures. So the county uses our revenues very effectively. We've identified capacity for a 30-year sustainable and structurally sound budget with the upcoming courthouse financial requirements that Gary spoke of. We are applying budgeting principles, utilizing standard, consistent, and transparent accounting practices. One accounting best practice, this is going to be, overview, I think, as we're beating this drum, but we want you to know what are the principles that this budget is based on. But we're focusing on actuals over actuals for those trends rather than budget over budget. A budget is a great plan, and then life happens. So when we're looking at our own personal expenditures, I know what I can spend, what I have spent, and that's what I'm going to use to monitor or to build my forecast. We do that here at the county level as well. The practice had been to look at budget over budget, but that also inflates those forecast numbers because we don't actually spend 100% of our budget. And then our actuals also tell us what happened and what are those real trends. You know, looking at professional services, are we contracting more out because we're not hiring the staff? So then we can look at, you know, what are the procurement needs that we have? So looking at actuals really drive and tell us how to look forward in our forecasts. Another guiding principle is to recognize overhead and appropriately cost to business units. As Chair Smith said, you know, we have all these costs to run a business. When I first started here, I stepped on the campus in December of 2019. I met with many directors and they shared, you need to learn our business. So taking that forward, what is the cost of doing business? And it's not only just the cost of this building, it's the cost to run within each of the departments. What is their overhead? We have fantastic directors, and they're over all these lines of businesses and different programs. Well, each of those programs has a requirement to pay a bit of that director's leadership, and that's what we are implementing, really focusing on that this fiscal year. I just wanted to share the budget book that you have in the Revenue Policy Section 2. It states back in 1991, the cost allocation model was started for Clackamas County. And it was established to eliminate the general fund subsidy of internal services, operations, and continues currently to identify true costs of doing business in all county departments. So we've not just come up with this today for a good business practice. This has been in the county since 1991, and we are really implementing it now as a time that we need to know how much it's costing to do each of these fantastic services that we provide to the county. An additional practice is to recognize position vacancies. We heard from Wes yesterday, Water Environment Services, that for the first time they recognized in their budget practice that they recognize they have vacancies and they don't need to identify dollars for those vacancies. They can actually reduce their expenditures by that amount that they know the vacancies are still going to be there for several months into the fiscal year. So knowing this, we can reduce personnel costs and we can reduce overall expenditures, therefore identifying capacity in our revenue. So this is our slide two. This is the overview of what you're going to hear today. Sandra is going to talk about Fund 100, because we do have 55 funds, I believe, down from 88 that we used to have. And we're going to go over this. I wanted to cut the anxiousness of what are we going to talk about? What are we going to hear? So we're going to hear about the fund. We're going to talk about our debt that we just mentioned briefly. Focus on contingency, our reserves. I'm going to speak to the forecast and more of the courthouse funding. Sandra's going to give another repeat high level of our cost allocations. We did quite an in-depth cost allocation presentation April 26th at the Budget Committee meeting, but she's going to review that. And then I'll talk about the strategy that we used on the reductions that Commissioner Scholl, you brought up on that page. How did we get to those numbers? And then we are going to, Sandra and I are going to share, going back and forth on the departments, the high-level summaries. And we've grouped them by their revenue stream and how they are primarily funded. So I think at this time, I do want to add, I just want to reiterate that if you have clarifying questions, please let us know, interrupt. We won't rush through this. We'll pause as needed. But if you do have detailed operational questions, those we would like to take, and then we can respond to them either in written form, connecting with the departments, or we'll have the department directors here Wednesday and Thursday. And thank you, and Sandra.
Okay, well, good morning, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your kind words. As Gary said, I'd want to just take a few seconds to thank my wonderful budget team that is behind the scenes, Blaze Riggins, Roxanne Fisher, Jian Sang, Priscilla Montoya, an amazing group of people, and they are happy to live and work quietly behind the scenes, but their work speaks volumes, as you can see in this 700-plus page book. So I couldn't do this without them. They make it possible for us to look like a cohesive team because they are so good at what they do. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to jump into the general fund. As I said previously, the general fund is we call it the granddaddy of the funds. It is where the discretionary dollars come in to the county, and it is composed of many departments. So this slide, you can see the first section is the departments that receive general fund support. They primarily receive general fund support as their source of revenue. The next group is no general fund support, but they are in the general fund because their net disposable dollars are available for the board's use. So completely discretionary, that's the county clerk and justice court. And then we have two departments that are reporting only. You'll hear about them. We call it a miscellaneous pass-through, meaning we receive dollars and then send them out. This also is where we pay payroll for some of the districts. We do that for WES, we do that for NCPRD, I believe we do that for Clackamas County Development Agency. That is done through that pass-through department. And again, it's other than just taking it in and paying it out, there is nothing else but reporting that gets done there. And then non-departmental is where we take in and where we transfer everything that is discretionary. So when we are also talking about reserves, contingency, and unappropriated, those dollars live in non-departmental. That is where your discretionary dollars are at. So of the general fund, or of the total county, $484 million is what is in the general, I'm sorry, $1.27 billion is the total Clackamas County budget. $484 million of that is general fund, so that's 38%. So the larger portion of the county operations lives in other funds that are not the general fund. Within that $484 million of the general fund, 155 or 153 million is the transfer dollars. That's the subsidy that we give. That is all of the property tax revenue is what we split amongst the general fund departments, and also H3S, a little bit to DTD, and you can see that split. And I'm going to show you on this next page. This is the split of the general fund support, and you can see visually the largest portions are public safety. Those are the departments on top, such as the sheriff office, $74 million, district attorney, $14.8 million, health, housing, and human services, $10.1, and so on and so forth. So this is the distribution of general fund support. The next slide, we had some questions about debt. This is the slide on debt. And you can see that as the debt is retiring, and we do have some that is retiring over the next few years, the next debt that we have coming up is the 2018 refunding. Commissioner Savas, you'll be happy to know that, it's the 2029 debt, but you can see that asterisk, that's the balloon payment. So we're always trying to keep in mind that we have a $6.2 million balloon payment that we have to make, and we have that also built into the forecast. So every single one of these debts, as it matures, as it retires, we have built into the forecast. Commissioner Schrader, I'm sorry to tell you, we actually have already built in the capacity in the forecast that says when this debt retires, we have additional general fund dollars available. We've taken that into account into that 35-year look of the forecast so that we could stabilize that overall county courthouse 15 million number that we keep talking about. So we are being considerate of that. I want you to feel very comfortable that we've taken that into account, and let you know we are very closely monitoring the debt. The other piece that I will tell you about debt is we have a bond rating. Moody's is our rating company. They have given us a AAA rating. AAA is the highest that we can get. What that means is, and if we made it equivalent to our credit score as individuals, this would probably be like 810, 815, 820. It's excellent, excellent credit. It is predicated on our large property tax base, our strong reserves, limited exposure to economic sensitive revenue, modest debt liabilities, and manageable costs. I will also tell you, Moody's didn't point this out, but normally it is, what they mean by manageable cost is strong policies and ability to make reductions when a time calls for. They do look at those things. They will reanalyze us. I believe it's every 3 years. We get reassessed, and then they'll do an outlook on how positive is their outlook. Do they put us on negative watch, or are they saying we're stable? So we always want to make sure that we're monitoring all of the elements of our general fund to continue with that AAA rating. That will enable us to get the lowest interest rate when we do go out for debt. And I'm sure right now in our outlook, we don't have any debt that will be issued, but I'm certain, as I sit here today, that there will come a need, you know, in the next 5 or 10 years. There will be something else. I know we're already talking about the jail. I don't know how that will be financed, but I imagine that it will require some financing. That will also be dependent on our debt rating. And just like the courthouse, we are not paying for the courthouse with a bond debt. We're actually just making an operating payment to the company, but their rate or the interest rate that they're charging us was predicated on our strong bond rating. So it all ties in together, and I just want to impress on all of you the importance of being okay making those tough decisions because they do impact our bond rating. Okay. The next slide, and this feeds right into the discussion that we had just a little bit ago. What you're going to see on this slide, or what you're seeing on it, is the green is contingency, and the red is our reserves. You can see that those are steadily going up as our budget increases. Those we modeled after our policy. Our policy says contingency can be 5% of our operating budget, and reserves has a maximum, and the reserve maximum says 15%. So we have maintained the policy, which is why you're seeing those as a solid line. And then the third item is unappropriated ending balance. Unappropriated ending balance is money that falls below contingency and reserves. So for those that are business-minded, what this means is we've got net income, and then after that net income, we calculated contingency and reserves based on policy, and then any money that fell below that is what we call unappropriated. And unappropriated, just as the name implies, it's not budgeted anywhere. So when we tell you the total, it is in that total, but state law says you can't use that money in the year in which you're adopting. Neither can you use reserves. So I just want you to know that that money is not usable to us in 23-24 once this budget is adopted. We can carry it forward to the future years and make use of it in the future, but not in the year in which you adopt. So this graph shows you that 30-year outlook for the courthouse, and what it's showing is that we will use that unappropriated reserve. We're going to spend it down to nothing. That was the direction that you asked us to take, and you said we want to maintain contingency and we want to maintain reserves at our policy level and give us the glide path that will keep us as stable as possible for that 30-year outlook using that unappropriated ending balance. So that is exactly what we have done in the forecast, and what we backed into the number is that glide path would be about a reduction of 15 million. If we could make a reduction of 15 million, and the earlier we make it, the better off we are. If we had waited another year, next year would look like 18 million. I think when we modeled it, it was about 3 million a year is how much more painful it would be if we delayed. So making it earlier, because you're going to hear today, I believe we said the first payment we're making on the courthouse is 24-25. So we're still a year out from making that first payment. However, the earlier that we make the payment, the smoother that glide path is and the lower that we need. And if you think about it in a different way, it's all we're doing is lowering the denominator. We're lowering the base of our costs because as we grow every year, we are growing on a smaller base. So those are just high level, and I think the next one is Elizabeth. Is that right? Okay.
I just want to make a general comment. It occurs to me that I had not reminded people, like, I think everybody knows where the restrooms are, and then there's coffee and water over here for members of the Budget Committee if they need that. And thank you, Sandra. I especially appreciate what you just said about the glide path for the 15 million every year, and because there's an awareness that it's not due in this coming year, but the year after that, and so to get in front of that makes a lot more sense. So thank you for that discussion. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Next, I'd like to...
Commissioner Scholl.
This is all very interesting, but it's a huge amount of details, and we're sitting on a 700-page book here. So as you go through this, if there's anything in here that you're referencing, if you could direct us to the page, because I'm flipping through this and not knowing where I'm going, so we can make notes, because taking notes as you speak is very critical. So if there is a slide you're referring to, or a page on tab 3-9 or whatever it might be, if you could direct the board to where to look, would be most appreciative.
Thank you, Commissioner Scholl. We will keep that in mind.
Yeah. Okay, so to clarify, some of the things you're referring to are not in the book.
Correct.
Okay.
These are higher level summaries. Okay. And we have emailed out, or maybe not yet. Okay. We can email this presentation out to the Budget Committee as well.
Do you want a paper copy of this slide deck, committee members? We can do it right now. Do you want a paper copy of what she's showing on the screen?
I would really like that because I'm a visual.
Take care of it as we speak.
It's easier to track on a paper copy, but I'm okay.
Okay.
Internet.
That would make it easier.
Yeah, and I apologize. That was a miss on my behalf.
That's okay.
Apologize.
Yeah, that's okay.
Would you like to wait for those copies?
No,
Oh,
go
okay.
ahead, please.
All right, next on the agenda here this morning is to talk about our forecast. And we've got a detailed spreadsheet, but mind you, this is a very abbreviated snapshot of a 30-year, 35-year column forecast. So what we've done is there's a black bar, 3 columns in from the right, and within that are a significant number of forecasted years. And then also the second column, or the next column over, is 30-year forecast, and then the middle of the following 3, or the next 3, is forecast year 34. So this summary, I'm going to talk about a couple of highlights from this that I want to take away, but this really demonstrates in detail, in numbers, what the slide previously that Sandra spoke to of our contingency reserves and unappropriated ending fund balance, how we are financially and sustainably sound, structurally sound over the next 30 years. So our general fund is Fund 100, and that is primarily what we focus on with the forecast. We've talked about a $1.2 billion county budget, but we do not do a forecast on that whole amount, that all the departments. We focus on general fund because it has the unrestricted dollars that we have more, you as Budget Committee and Commissioners have more control of. And so those are the dollars we want to see how flow through the fiscal years. The other departments primarily have designated dollars that are specific for use, so those budgets are more restricted. So we look at each year to analyze the sustainability of our operating revenue and our operating expenses, because it is those trends of the revenues, taxes coming in, what is the increases from those, and other opportunities of revenues versus fees and charges. In expenses, we identify what are the assumptions, what are the personnel costs going up. We have PERS, which every other year has a significant increase. We have cost of living changes. Of course, we know a couple of years ago, COVID caused quite a jump in our cost of living that we didn't anticipate when we were doing projections or forecasts several years prior. And so it's a very living document. And then also, as you see, expanded out below the the net operating income loss line, it shows special projects. So that's where, after we have our operating revenue, we back out the operating expenses. What are the dollars available for other county projects that we can use these unrestricted dollars for? It is a living document. We use it as a model to run different scenarios, what ifs. During brainstorm times, it's like, well, what if we used cash? What if we used ARPA, instead? So we back out the expense. What if we did this project? Should we take out debt? What would that debt payment look like over the course of the life of that debt versus what if we just paid cash? Because money costs money. And so would it be cheaper less expensive for the county to pay cash as a one-time expense for a capital project, or would it be better suited to spread those costs over the few years? So this is how we use a forecast. And it's a very dynamic document. We update it. So if you recall, Budget Committee, we talked about the forecast in April 26th meeting, and it had different starting numbers because back then we were still using the budget as our forecast year one. As you'll see in the first column, our projection forecast year one is now the projected dollars that we have from our county departments. We asked them to say, okay, well, we had a budget for 22-23. Now, where are we going to end up with our best estimates and knowledge of how this year is progressing? So we updated that column. And now we have a forecasted budget. We have a budget that we've proposed that's sitting in front of you today. Before, we had forecast year two was escalated off of the budget for this current year. Now we've been able to drill down and have more accurate numbers. So now we have projected in their first column. The second year we have this budget that's before you. And now forecast year number 3 is based off of the budget proposed. And it's a tighter budget, we know, because we've had reductions. And so it is going to be a different forecast going year 3 out the 30 years. Because we've been able to identify where we can have revenue savings and lessen our expenditures. I do want to show that the results of that is the very bottom number, fund balance of net reserve requirement is at $87 million. That includes the contingency and reserves that we did not spend. Now, for our budget of this fiscal year, 22-23, that amount was 81.2, I believe. So in fact, it was 81.2 was our budget, and we are now at 87.3 million. That means we have trending. We never spend 100% of our budget. That's quite a bit more in savings than what we had actually budgeted. And so we're looking at actuals when we're budgeting the next year. Column 2, staying down in the lower section, we have the contingency reserve of 56 million. That's the total of both of those. And then we have that net reserve requirement, unappropriated of 28, almost 29 million. So those numbers are very important as we look at our forecast, because those ending numbers always are going to be our beginning numbers. Where are we going to start at the year what dollars do we have, and how are we going to utilize those through our operating expenses, and then how are we going to use them on projects for the county services. Absolutely.
Commissioner West?
Oh, sorry.
Question. That's okay. Earlier you said jump in and ask questions. Just for my own learning, we never spent 100% of our budget. There's always a little left over. That went into reserves. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay. Now we want to budget to actuals. So are we now having to budget a specific amount for our reserves since we're not taking it from actuals? Like, what changes now when we continue to add to our reserves and to our savings, because it sounds like it was always just coming from being an overage. Am I understanding it right?
It is from unspent dollars, you're correct, but we don't always have that much of savings. So you'll see in the, and I will present, or I'll give you guys the full 30 years. You can see that sometimes operating revenue does go into reserve or into the red,
Okay.
or we do need to tap into those additional dollars. So the beginning balance may be less than anticipated because we had to use that for our operating. But it is a collection of unspent dollars year over year, or the net balance year over year.
So I guess, clarification, if we're going to actuals and not to budget, then where, and it sounds like, where do those like if we don't have those overages anymore, like where do we continue to add to our reserves?
So we're using actuals to create the budget, but we
Okay.
still have a starting point. So the second column of the fiscal or forecast year 2, that's where we're going, that's our new restart. That's our new starting
Okay.
point for doing our forecast, because that's the best information we have.
Okay.
We can assume that we're not going to spend that 100%, but we've put together, every year we put together the best budget we can, and that is our starting point for adding our escalators to look forward.
Okay, thank you.
May I add, so Commissioner, you're correct. As we get more firm in budgeting actuals to actuals across the year, the amount will be less of the carryover, but still no one will spend 100% of their budget because things out of our control will occur or it's unlikely to spend 100%. But it will be smaller, you're correct, Commissioner.
But we'll still be able to have reserves to policy.
Correct.
We'll still make sure that we have what's necessary for the rainy day.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, and we do that best practice and per policy.
Commissioner Chavez, and then Ms. Montoya.
Yeah, it's always where your point in time where you are now, trying to get your footing. The only thing I want to just add to that's the unpredictability aspect is inflation. We are seeing an anomaly in inflation and cost of services as a result of COVID coming out of that. And maybe if there's time permitting, I'd love to see a graph of what those trends are with, our increase of cost. It's going to show inflation, but I'm not asking for inflation. Just show the trend line of increasing cost. But I'd also like to see, which is going to lag behind, is going to be the cost allocations. I know that's going to be as you change the model. Are we capturing that piece? Are we keeping up? And I think that we can see that we've had some gaps. And what I wanted to say yesterday was, as far as holding back, Gary, those cost allocations, I just more pain in the end. The line, you've heard this line before: no good deed goes unpunished. But that might be informative because it's really about where we are now. But having the reserves and contingencies allows us to adjust for that inflation and any other unforeseen anomalies.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Montoya?
Real quick, I just wanted to point out the current forecast builds in a 5% vacancy savings across that future year. As we go, because this is a living document, as Elizabeth said, we update the forecast 2 to 3 times a year, and we look at it whenever there's a special project request. So anytime, like Elizabeth said, we're talking about something, well, what happens, what will happen to the forecast if we put this project in, and are we going to finance it? Are we going to pay for it cash? So we start modeling all of the scenarios with the forecast. So you will see this updated forecast a couple of times a year, and each one refines based on our history and what we have experienced. So that's one. The other is I wanted to point out, because I know that there will be people that look at the reserves and the contingency and the unappropriated, and it's like, what do they need money for? They've got millions. And I just want to say the days of operating for these dollars, and give me 1 second, I'll pop it up. I want to say in the years, like 5 years out, I think we're at like 78 days. 106 days of operating. When we go to the low, we are at 78 days of operating. So 78 days for a county this big is not very many days of operation, because I can tell you, like, we pay 3 weeks after the earning period or 2 weeks after the earning period, vendors being paid like a month after they do the service. So when you start thinking about the liabilities that we have outstanding and when that cash is flowing, 78 days is not a very long time. So please keep that in mind, because I know that those dollars are very big, and the thinking is you don't need any more money.
Ms. Montoya, is there a best
Commissioner
practice?
Chavez?
Sorry. Is there a best practice on how many days of operating expenses we should have? I know, like, if somebody was to lose their job tomorrow, some of the financial extras say, hey, you should have at least 3 to 6 months until you get back on your feet again, your own personal savings account. What is the best practice for the county this size in operating expenses? What's the gold standard?
So Government Finance Officers Association, which is the national and Canada, so international association that we look to for our best practices, it doesn't give a number. And the reason why it doesn't give a number or a percentage is because some states are very heavily dependent on sales tax and other revenue sources along with property tax. So when I lived in California, we would say a quarter, so 90 days, because we had a mix of property tax and sales tax. Here in Oregon, where we are primarily property tax based, I've been an advocate for almost a year. Nobody has listened to me. Anywhere I've worked before has listened to 1 year, because it's like an impossible number to reach. But the reality is that if we had a downturn, and if you think about it, economists say you're like a year into a recession before they figure out, hey, we're in recession. They actually tell you after the fact. So we, and thus property tax, we get our property tax revenue primarily in November. If the recession started in, let's say, a January, we wouldn't know it until almost a year in. And at that point, it's very hard to react, and it would be very painful. So for me, just as a finance professional, my recommendation is, and I believe that the draft policy that we had, I was recommending 25%.
I'm going to continue. We are.
Just real quick while we're on this topic. There's a lot of private businesses didn't have enough reserves to make it through COVID, right? That's an example. But my question really is, Sandra, on the operating expense, what do you have baked in for inflation in your forecast?
I'm going to go off of my memory, but I believe what we have is 5% in 23, 24, 4% the second year, and then like 3.5 out. Okay. And don't quote me on that, but I'll have them pull the latest forecast that we provided, and it has the assumptions.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, 5%. Elizabeth just confirmed it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll speed up here on the forecast. So you may be asking, where do we see the $15 million reduction that the departments have built into their budget? And that you will find in the second column, which is forecast year 2. In previous forecasts, you've always seen that red negative $15 million as its own line as a strategic reduction. But due to the budget being complete, it has that $15 million reduction built in. So it's a reduction in the operating expense line in the second column, which is forecast year 2. Okay. In essence of time, I'll just move along. I think we've covered a lot on this forecast. I've shared what I think is important on this. And please remember, it is a living document, and we're always looking to see how every activity changes the outcome, because we want to look 30 years in the future. The courthouse, just real quick, try to cover anything that's not already been covered. It is a private-public partnership, a 3P model. So our vendors, PCL, and if you look out the windows, you'll see their crane and all the activity out there, they took out the debt for the county. But as Gary mentioned, and he said, we have committed to repay that debt for them. So we are on the hook, even though we didn't go to the bank, but our AAA rating, our good standing, allowed for that debt to come in at a good interest rate and to make this partnership possible. So included in our annual payments is, as I think we pointed out earlier, it's not only that principal payment and interest on their debt, but it's also operations and maintenance for 30 years, as well as reserves dollars, because we want to be good stewards of the new buildings that we have, and it takes replacement. We need to replace and keep everything in good working order. Okay, so right now, Sandra will give a high overview of cost allocations.
Sandra, do you want to put your tent card down? Unless you still want to say something.
No, thank you. I'm going to jump into cost allocations. I feel like we've beaten a dead horse, so I'm going to go at it at a very high level. But just in summary, for those who are just tuning in, cost allocations is the overhead. It's the distribution of overhead costs for our county services. This year, or 23-24 that is before you, we added one department and one program, and that is County Council is coming into cost allocations for the first time. That is at the recommendation of our consultant, and the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. That is a program that is within county administration. That is also being included in the 23-24 cost allocation. That increased our allocation from the 22-23 model that we used as a base. And why we keep pointing that out is, one, there's always going to be a lag between our future budget that you are reviewing and the base, because it happened in the past. So costs, as we roll forward, will continue to inch up. And so there's always going to be a gap that the general fund will be expected to cover. The only way we can avoid that is to build in an escalator into the cost allocation, and that is altogether possible. We didn't do it in this model, quite frankly, because the price tag, the increase was already pretty significant. And so we were trying to minimize that increase. So with that said, we're going to move on and let you know, again, central services and internal services, those are the departments, again, that service inside the county. We don't provide services for external groups. We don't provide services for, a club out in the organization. It's only services to the county, and that is the cost that we are dispersing. The primary driver of those cost distributions is full-time equivalency, but that is not the only driver. So we've got others. There could be hours, could be one. The number of computers in the technology and services is a common one. Accounts payable, number of account code lines for accounts payable. Those are some examples of cost allocation drivers that are in the model. And again, tab 27 is where you'll find the recommendations from the consultant for what we use to distribute the costs. As Gary mentioned, because there was a large increase between the 22-23 and 23-24 cost allocations, a one-time subsidy was provided to some of the departments. And we'll point out, it was not all of the departments. It was just some of the departments, and really the decisions was based on looking at those 3-year averages, what they could sustain, and the need, the priority. Again, quite frankly, it was the priority from the board. So public safety was a very high priority, the highest priority, and so we were really working hard to protect those departments. The other is that we asked all of the departments, we encouraged them to look at vacancy savings for their, to mitigate their increases. That is something that's very different from what this county has done in the past. But the reality is we have vacancy savings every year. One of the charts that you have in your, that I emailed out last night as a response, it's a response packet, was the FTE history by department. And you can see every year within departments, there are vacancies. I believe right now there is only one department in the county that is 100% filled. Every other department has a vacancy. And so what we ask the departments to do is plan, look at your history, and actually plan on some of those savings. If there's a year where you are full, then we're going to budget to that filled level. But while you have vacancies, we want you to anticipate. If you're not going to fill that vacancy until September, then you've got 3 months of vacancies that we can calculate into the budget, because it's going to take you that long to do a recruitment. And the reality is the recruitments are lengthy, especially in our current environment where sometimes we're having to do multiple recruitments in order to get somebody hired. So that is the cost allocations. And the next one, Elizabeth, you're covering reductions?
The next section is on our reductions. Just what was the strategy and the strategies used to determine what reductions by department? It was not across the board. As Gary said, it was very strategic. We looked at actual expenditures and determined that there was opportunities even within my budget. I kept thinking we were going to have these contracts done, and that wasn't realistic. So I was able to reduce my my budget personally due to just looking at the trending of what happened. And so we presented each of these recommendations that were customized with each of the department directors, and we reviewed their information. What were their challenges? Was the data that we were using, was it accurate? Were there anomalies that we needed to take into consideration that we couldn't see within the financials that we were looking at? It was a tough conversation each time to ask them to take further reductions with the addition of additional cost allocations, but we felt it was the best, and that there was opportunities that we could reduce all of our budgets. And then we made those recommendations also to minimize staff reductions. We didn't want to do that, and we didn't really want to eliminate services, but we didn't want to add extra work onto those staff that were still here if we were reducing staff. So it was a combination, very delicately done, very strategic with each of the departments on these reductions.